Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio, and this is our 6th video on planning a quilt, and today I'll be doing the quilting on the Quatrefoil quilt top. Now this design that I chose is not as dense as what I normally quilt, but I think it works really well with the quilt. So I hope you'll stay with me and I'll show you how I planned out this quilting. I have a sheet of vinyl laid over my quilt while it's loaded on my long arm, and I'm using a dry erase marker to try out a design idea that I have. Before I loaded this quilt, I had already thought about using cross hatching in the corners of the quilt and then following it through the center of each block. And so here I am drawing that out and looking to see what that looks like and to see if it is something that I want to do. Now for the center, there's several different ways to do that. I could do like a starburst type look like this, or I can change it up, which I decide to go ahead and do right here. I've got a piece of tissue here that I'm using and as an eraser, and then I can just erase my marks and start over. So I'm going to go from corner or from center to center and just draw a box, and that gives me the crosshatch look. And so I am considering that, and I had also decided to try out using some 1/4 inch straight lines in the dark patches that just mimic the shape of the patch there, and I wanted to see what that looked like. Now anything that I do with straight lines is going to require a ruler, and it's going to take time, so I also take that into consideration. So another thing I thought, well, maybe I could try some curved marks and to see what that looked like, and I decided at this point that I like that better than the straight lines within the dark squares. So I'm going to erase those straight lines and then carry the curved lines through. Now with curved lines, you can do those freehand. You can also use circle templates or curved templates to give you those curves when you're quilting. Some of the times I'll do it freehand, and some of the time I will use a ruler. It depends on the depth of that curve. If it's real shallow, I will do it freehand. If it's pretty pronounced, then I will use a tool, a ruler, to help me, a circle template or an oval or a curved ruler. Now I'm carrying those curved lines into the center of the block and trying that out to see what I think of that, and then adding 2 cross lines in the center. What I'm trying to do is to balance curved lines and straight lines, and yet still not have dense quilting in this top. I could easily do the dense quilting because that's kind of been my nature, is to quilt heavily, but I don't want to do that on this quilt. I want to keep it kind of a light custom job, so I'm trying out my options on that. Now since these blocks are joined together just side by side, they form a secondary pattern, and it's basically just the inverse of the main blocks. It's instead of the centers of those blocks being light, then in here they're dark, so it's and the colors are reversed, so we have kind of a shadow effect or a negative effect of the original blocks. So I decided I would just carry that design into the negative blocks and keep it consistent. So I'm here trying that look out to see if that is something that I like. And I often carry it through several different blocks so I can see what that looks like side to side, side by side, and kind of gives me an idea of a path I can follow to get across the quilt without doing any stopping and starting, which is what I'm doing now. You notice I'm not picking up my pen, I'm just going from one point to the next. So that gives me an idea of how I can go through this top without having a lot of stops and starts. So here's a closer up view, and I am doing some more drawing. And here I'm going to kind of change that line. It kind of didn't curve the way I wanted it to, so we're just going to redo that. And now I have a bigger area that is drawn in, so I have a better idea of what this design will look like. And after looking at it, I decided maybe it was too busy, and I'm thinking about erasing some of those lines and just leaving them out of the quilting altogether. So we'll take a look at that and see what that looks like. So now I'm ready to start the quilting. So I have a 7-inch circle ruler here, and this is one that I got from Linda's Electric Quilters, and it has a star cutout in the center, so it has a notch on one side. So I have to keep turning that template to avoid that notch, but it's not that big of a deal. It also gives me a good place to rest my thumb and help manipulate that ruler anyway. So I'm going around all of the outside sections of the block and getting those curved lines in, and just turning that ruler as I need to. And you can see I'm in automatic mode, which is stitch regulated, and taking my time on this. So now I've got those outside pieces done, and I need to go in and do the dark pieces. So I want to go from the tip of that block to the lower corner and just go around that entire piece. Now I did work out a way that I could go all the way across the quilt and get this done, but right here I'm just demoing one block so that you can see how that looks. And the thread I'm using is a variegated thread. It's by Signature, and it's one of their gradations, and it goes from a deep turquoise to a light turquoise, and the spacing of the colors, they're short spaces so that it doesn't, we don't have a real long line of one color and then it's switching immediately to another color. So it blends really well, and it actually looks pretty good in the white. So now I've got kind of the main lines quilted in this block, and I'm deciding at this point that I think that's all I'm going to do, and I'm just going to go over to the next block. And you may have noticed that I don't have all the lines quilted in there that I had drawn on the vinyl, and that happens a lot. I can draw things out on the vinyl, but once I quilt it in the quilt, sometimes I change my mind and decide I don't need everything that I have drawn in, and I just kind of leave it. And in this case, I do go back and add a little extra quilting, but it's still different than what I had originally drawn out in the quilt. So don't ever be afraid of changing your mind about your quilting as you're going along, because if you quilt it in and then you don't like it, you know, it's going to take you a lot of time to rip it out. This way, if I like where I'm at, I stop and just don't put the extra quilting in until I can look it over and then decide if it needs extra quilting or not. So that actually saves you a lot of time, because it can take you 10 times as long to rip out the quilting as it did to put it in. So that's just a huge time waster. So you know, just take your time and just go step by step. So now I'm going, I started in the center of this block, and now I'm going around to the outside. Now when I stabilize this quilt, which is, I always stabilize my quilts before I quilt them. It helps keep everything square for me. Since I didn't want to stitch in the ditch around each individual block, what I did was do the cross hatching through the center of the quilt block. So that is something that I knew I wanted to keep. So that helps stabilize the quilt. And then I have also done the borders, and I did not get that taped, but I will show you some details of that here at the end of the video. So I'm on the last block of the row, and just doing all the curves. And this does get easier with each block that I do. It's a little bit difficult at the beginning because it's the first block that I've quilted with this design, and I'm not familiar with it. But once I do it a time or two, it gets easier, and then each block gets a little bit faster. So in total, with doing the borders and the stabilization and all the detail quilting, that quilt took me 4 hours, and that's a 48 by 48 inch quilt top. So that's really not too bad for a custom job on a quilt, though it is a small quilt, so that helps a lot too. And here is some video of the whole length of the quilt, and you can see me quilting this last row. So I will just turn on some music and let you enjoy the quilting. Once I got all that quilting done, I rolled the quilt back up to the front, to the very top, and looked it over and decided that it did need more quilting. And this quilting is a little bit more functional because you just need a certain amount of quilting for a quilt to hold together well under a lot of use. And I think this quilt probably will get a lot of use if you do a lot of light, or just if you just do light quilting. It really isn't going to hold together very well under a lot of use. So I went in and decided, instead of doing more cross hatching, that I would stitch in the ditch around the center square in the block. And I'm also going to outline that block from point to point to make it a little bit more functional. Now what that also means is that these squares in the corners are also going to need some cross hatching. So I'm just putting the extra line of quilting in there that I had decided to leave out, and so here I am putting it back in. So there's going to be a lot of stopping and starting to get this done, and it's a little more time consuming, but I think the quilt will hold together better now that it has more quilting in it. And that's something that we have to think about with any quilt we do, is there enough quilting in there to actually hold it together under numerous washings and wearing and just daily use. So here I'm going to start the cross hatch through that aqua square, and then just follow it around the block here, making a square, and it's all just stitch in the ditch until I get to those light aqua squares, and then it goes across, making the cross hatch. But so it's not really showing a whole lot of extra quilting on the surface of the quilt, but it is adding some functional quilting to help hold this quilt together. So this is just something that I've learned with time. I've been quilting since I was 15 years old, which is a long time for me, and you know, I have learned that if I do like quilting, whether it is hand quilting or machine quilting, over time on a quilt that is used on a daily basis, the thread can break, it can wear, and you know, the quilt can fall apart. So I don't want that to happen to this quilt. So this is just, you know, just good quilting practice is to get enough quilting in there to help hold the quilt together, and it's, you know, it's 3 layers. Here are some photographs of the completed quilt. I don't have a long shot of it, but I do have some close-ups here. So this is after all of the quilting is done and I've taken it off of the machine, and you can see the quilting here pretty well. And I did use the variegated thread in here, but I think it blended in really well with the white, even though there's no white in this thread. It's all shades of turquoise and aqua. It is a polyester thread by Signature, and it's one of their gradient threads. And I think it just blended really well with the colors in this quilt. But you can see the cross hatching, and you can see all the curves that have been quilted in. You don't notice the stitch in the ditch. That is there as a functional quilting, and that helps hold that quilt together. And here's the borders. I just did a big swirl in the outer border, and then I did some curves in the inner border. So I didn't do anything elaborate there either. And that can always use some extra quilting if I ever feel like it needs it. I could just put it back on the machine and add a little extra quilting here and there. But at the moment, I think this is the way it's going to be. And this was kind of a fun project. It wasn't so large that I knew I was going to spend days on the quilting or even weeks. And so that kind of keeps my energy up, and it's something I was able to complete, which is good. With it being so cold outside, it's kind of hard to concentrate on anything for too long because my basement studio is also cold. So this was a good project for me to work on during this cold winter weather. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video on doing the quilting on the Quatrefoil quilt. This one actually went fairly fast for me. I often quilt pretty densely, so it can take 20 to 80 hours to do a quilt, depending on how much quilting I put in it and how large the quilt is. So this one went together in about 4 hours, which is really good for me. So I'll have to keep this design in mind for another quilt that I want to get done pretty quickly. So if you like this video, please click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes up. And in the meantime, I hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the next video.